Hi, I'm Amy Liu, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Government here at UT Austin. Today, I will be talking about this Ukraine, the developments going on there, and whether or not there's a solution for it. So, Ukraine today is a political, economic, and social battleground between Russia and the West. And by the West, I mean the United States and Europe. So during the Cold War, this is the period between 1945 and 1991, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. And so by extension, Ukraine was a part of our arch nemesis. After 1991, there was a lot of hope among those in the West that Ukraine would adopt democracy. There was a lot of hope that Ukraine would adopt capitalism. The process has been slow, at times it's been derailed, but for each time that Ukraine has adopted some sort of democratic reform or adopted some sort of market reform, this has been a symbolic victory for those in the West. Not surprisingly, not everyone has been excited about these changes. Russia is an obvious case. There are also pro-Russian politicians in Ukraine that would like to see their country aligned more closely with Russia than with the West. And so for each time one of these market democratic reforms have stalled, it has been a symbolic victory for them. Today we are seeing the tensions between the pro-Westerners and the pro-Russians. And how this tension unfolds has great implications at a global scale between Russia and the West. If the West wins, this means the West will be able to push its borders up to Russia. And if Russia wins, this means Russia gets to push its borders against Europe. Today we are seeing a tug-of-war between the pro-Westerners and the pro-Russians. So in the fall of 2013, the Russian government was led by a pro-Russian man. The president, his name was Viktor Yanukovych. That fall, Ukraine had the chance to sign an agreement with the European Union. The agreement would have meant substantial sums of financial aid, foreign aid, from the EU to Ukraine. But one of the terms of the agreement was that Yanukovych had to free a political rival from prison. Her name was Yulia Tymoshenko. Disagreements between Yanukovych and the EU about Tymoshenko ultimately led to the failure of the negotiations. When the negotiations failed, people began to protest. They protested on the streets in the capital. The capital is Kiev. And these protests lasted for several months. And at times, the protests got quite bloody. But in February 2014, Yanukovych fled to Russia in the middle of the night, thereby vacating the office of the presidency. Tymoshenko was freed, and she subsequently would make a run for the office of the presidency. She would not win. Instead, the winner was another pro-Western politician, a man named Petro Poroshenko. As a fun fact, Poroshenko is a businessman, and he made his money in the candy industry. So while all of this is going on in Kiev, there's another set of developments in the south. In the south, there's an area called Crimea. It's along the Black Sea. It is also home to a large and important Russian naval base. When Ukraine was independent, Russia and Ukraine came to an agreement that Ukraine would be given the rights to Crimea so long as it disarmed its nukes from the Soviet era. So when Yanukovych was ousted from office, we suddenly see a surge, we suddenly see a rise in anti-Western, pro-Russian protests throughout Crimea. And at the end of February 2014, in the middle of the night, a bunch of unmarked Russian troops rolled into Crimea and they took over the local parliament. Subsequently, there was a referendum. 96% of the people indicated they wanted Crimea to reunify with Russia. This event has been highly condemned by the West, and in fact, Russia has been kicked out of the G8. The G8 is an elite club. It is an organization composed of the 8 leading developed economies in the world. Not only has Russia been kicked out of the G8, it has also been faced with a large number of sanctions. There is definitely a solution, but I'm not sure what it is. To be able to offer a solution to Ukraine requires understanding its history. Ukraine has long been divided between an eastern and a western half. And the things that we are seeing today are not new. If you look at a map of Europe on the eve of World War II in 1939, you will see that half of Ukraine was already occupied in the Soviet Union. The other half did not fall into the Soviet Union until after the war. Fast forward 70 years to the 2010 presidential election between Viktor Yanukovych, who is pro-Russian, and Yulia Tymoshenko, who is pro-Western. If you look at which districts they carried, which districts voted for Tymoshenko, which districts voted for Yanukovych, you will see again that Ukraine is divided strictly right down the middle. The western half voted for Tymoshenko, the eastern half voted for Yanukovych. This division is not just about politics, it's not just about geography, it's also about economics. The western half would like to see their country aligned more closely with the EU. The eastern half would like to see ties that are closer with Russia. Even culturally, the western half speaks Ukrainian, the eastern half speaks Russian. And even though Ukrainian and Russian are both Slavic languages, they're very, very similar, the fact that something this minor is such a contentious issue is indicative of the importance or the division between the East and the West. So in sum, is there a solution? I'm sure there is. But is there a solution that is fair to the Ukrainians, to both sides, that keeps Ukraine as a whole, and avoids war? I don't think there is.